For you folks in the UK and Europe, it's toward the end of the day, and we appreciate your holding up on cocktail hour, or maybe you want to start. For those of you in North America, we'll get you out of here in time for lunch. And for those of you in Australia and New Zealand who registered for this, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, so tomorrow. So I hope you're really not up and watching this, because it will be recorded. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. First of all, this session is being recorded, and both the audio and the video parts of the presentation will be available. We'll send it by email, the link, to everyone who's registered. There's also a white paper on stopping donor churn that accompanies this presentation, and we'll send that to you also as an attachment. And we'll send you lots of good stuff here. We'll send you a free link to the free feedback widget, free forever. Through that link, you'll find easy-to-follow instructions, and whether you're a two-person operation or a large group with a webmaster and IT folks, there should be absolutely no barrier to setting us up and using it. It only takes a few minutes to put it in place. Finally, on the issue of questions today, please feel free to ask questions as we go along. If we don't have time to answer all of them, we'll prepare and send everyone a question and answer piece with the questions listed anonymously. Then we'll follow up personally with each of you who asked questions and make sure we've answered your question in a way specific to your organization. So we want your questions. We also want to protect your identity. But the more questions, the more answers we have, the better for everyone. So let me give you a little background on today's webinar. There's a lot of information, a lot of facts, case examples that we're going to share, and these are based on research both in the commercial world and research and practical application and testing by donor voice in the nonprofit world. Most folks in this session are no doubt aware that it costs between 8 and 10 times more to attract a new donor than to hold on to a current donor. This is a key reason why the commercial world spends billions of dollars to hold on to customers. Sadly, the nonprofit world spends less than 1%. In fact, most anti-churn programs in our nonprofit world are called reinstatement or reactivation programs, because almost everyone waits between 14 and 16 months to deal with a lost donor. In short, we usually act only when the horse is out of the barn. Today we're going to talk about how to really get into an anti-churn game, what actions you can take that matter, what actions don't matter, and then how to stop the hemorrhaging. So let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Kevin Schulman, the CEO of Donor Voice, who will take us through this based on his years of experience measuring customer satisfaction and donor attitudes and the actions organizations take that either help hold on to donors or drive them away. Kevin?
Thanks, Roger. And Roger will be, in addition to MC, doing color commentary here, so expect to hear from both of us as we weave through this. The first thing with figuring any sort of business challenge out, and certainly churn or its sister, cousin, companion retention is a business challenge for the sector, as all the industry data will support. You got to start with a point of view on how churn works. And absent a point of view, all the effort is going to be random. It's going to be guesswork. It may be educated guesswork, but in a world where you've got an infinite number of options before you to solve a given business challenge, we're going to have to get past random. So have a point of view on how the world works. This is our point of view, and hopefully it's a pretty simple and fairly intuitive to everybody on the phone today. The interactions that you have with your donors across the channels, they actually matter. Those interactions are things that you're doing to your house file donors in the name of retention, in the name of keeping them, in the name of avoiding churn, that have time, cost, and effort put against them. And they occur not just in the fundraising marketing channels, but in all of your customer-facing channels, which is going to include donor service, event, advocacy, even operations. Any place that your donors come into contact with you, that creates an interaction, it creates an experience, and all we're arguing is that those actually matter, and that the sum total of those experiences and the quality of them, which is only going to be, which is a judgment made by the donors, not by you, is going to dictate whether they stick around. So again.
Yeah, Kevin, I might add, or just emphasize that probably most of the folks in this webinar are fundraisers, and you guys and gals shouldn't take the hit for bad retention and churn alone, because this, as Kevin says, goes across the organization, from your board and CEO to your donor service center, your communications folks, your social media folks. Everything the organization does matters. So when you have a chance, share the recording of this with them, because this is not your problem alone.
That's exactly right. So what does it look like if we're going to marry up this point of view with a point of view on churn, this point of view about interactions and the fact that they matter, and a point of view on churn? I'm going to walk through this conceptual chart, and I think it's useful. It'll serve as the context and the foundational bit for the remainder of the session. So up top, this is our point of view on churn. These are the stages that occur for donor churn, and we'll go through each of these independently in a moment. Now, you'll notice that the churn point we've flagged here. This is the decision point where the donor decides to leave, or the supporter or the volunteer. It doesn't matter. Any place that you've got an inability, or you've got a problem with holding on to your folks, your supporters, givers or doers, that's a churn point. And again, it's dictated by the donor, not by you. You'll see that there's a whole lot of activity that occurs in this sort of life stage of churn, pre-churn point. This is where we have an opportunity to prevent this from ever happening. So what about those interactions across channels? That is what this visual funnel is intended to reflect. These are your interactions, and by extension, these are your donors or supporters that are having those interactions. So let's start to unpack this a bit. Post-churn, what do we mean by that? Well, this is the point where the donor, again, the donors decided that they're out the door. For all of your cash donors, which in the U.S. is going to be the vast majority of your donors, and in the European models where you've got monthly giving, it's still going to be 40, 50, maybe % of your file. Anybody who's a cash donor, you're actually not going to know that they left until months later. Oftentimes it's 15, 20, 30 months later before the charity has actually elected to look back, see who hasn't taken an action, and then attempt to reintroduce these folks to the organization. Typically that's a reinstate effort, and it's going to be oftentimes using the very same acquisition package that was used way back when to bring them in the door the first time. And because this remarketing effort never actually addresses the root cause of why they left, it tends just to reinforce the decision to exit. So we're in this case, we're dealing with churn after the fact, and for a cash giving model, we're dealing with it many, many months after the fact. Final trigger is that decision to stop giving or doing on behalf of the charity, and this can be a negative interaction that they have with your organization, or it can just be exposure to competitor marketing. Okay? We've got a lot of competition in this sector, an enormous amount of competition. The competitiveness of the sector is increasing, and the size of the donor pool and the amount of money available is shrinking. So we've got a ton of competition. They're getting exposed to a lot of competitor marketing. That can be one of the reasons they elect to leave. Trying to fix the problem here is going to be high cost, low benefit. Now, it is true that for the monthly donor population, we often have some indication, some fairly good indication, that they're exiting, that they've made the decision to no longer support the organization, the credit card no longer processes, the check's not coming in, and there are attempts made, we acknowledge, by the sector and the charities with those monthly giving programs to try to save that donor. They're going to try to get them to reduce the monthly amount, reduce the frequency of the automatic debit process. And there is some success there. But again, we're dealing with a finite population, and oftentimes it is too little too late. Okay? And the gap between this pre-churn phase, which includes all the marketing exposure that occurs in acquisition before they ever become our donor, the amount of time that can transpire between pre-churn and the final trigger can be years. It can actually also be days. So what is pre-churn? Pre-churn is anything that's done or communicated in the acquisition process, the broader marketing and communications effort that's going to set at least loose expectations for what the donor is going to be looking for once they come in the door. Okay, and having that consistency between those loose expectations that we've set and what happens when they come in the door is pretty darn critical. We're going to explain some of that in a moment here. But the piece that we've saved for last is really where we're going to focus all of our content for this webinar and where we think the sector needs to focus. And that's because it's not focusing here now. This is getting into the root cause business and understanding, first identifying, and then understanding, and then managing the interactions across channels that are actually causing that decision to exit. And the reason that those interactions are causing that decision to exit is that they're not meeting donor needs or requirements. Pretty straightforward. Okay? And the transactional data only sort of a lens, which is the predominant way in which the sector tries to analyze and understand donors, is never going to tell you why. Okay? No matter how much you torture that transactional data, you're never fully going to know the answer on to whether or not the interaction was positive or negative. And it sounds simple. We're going to underscore how and why it works. The only way you know is if you ask them. Okay? So we need to get into the root cause business, and that's what the rest of this session is going to cover. What the heck does that mean, and how you go about doing it? Because this is the place that we can stop churn before it starts. This is also, by the way, we're going to make the case, getting into the root cause business and identifying those interactions that actually matter, and then servicing those interactions, and more importantly, servicing the donors or the supporters who are having those interactions. That's a different business, and it's a far better way to raise money than fundraising. I'll say that again. Getting into the business of identifying the interactions that matter, and again, recall, they're not all in the fundraising domain, and then servicing those interactions, and more importantly, the donors or the supporters who are having those interactions, is a much better way to raise money than fundraising. Fundraising, as it's typically defined today, is a volume game, and it's highly inefficient. And we push out as much stuff as we can through as many channels as we can to get hand raisers, those people who take the action, make a donation. Okay, that's what fundraising looks like. And it's become increasingly hard to raise money with that volume-based approach. So in part, what we're going to argue is not quality in place of quantity. You can have both. And that's probably the false choice that gets implicitly applied in the market, is that somehow you can't have quality and quantity. Yeah, we can probably build some relationships and have some high-touch experiences, but only for the major donors, which is a tiny percentage, head count-wise, of our donor pool. We can't do that for the mass parts of the file. We're here to tell you you can. You can have quality and quantity. So how do you get into the root cause business? This is a quote that I think is useful to actually read verbatim. And this is from a guy, some of you may be familiar. He's got quite the personal brand in the web analytics space, and with the title of Digital Marketing Evangelist for Google, he's got some gravitas. And this is a direct quote from Avanish. All the quantitative data that you and I have from our web analytics tools is really good at helping us understand the what happens. Visits and visitors, page views, refers, keyword, bounce, paths, improve your campaigns, fix pages, fire someone. It cannot, if you torture the data, tell you why something happened. I would extend that point of view to include RFM data, frequency, monetary amount, response rate, average gift, the transactional data. It'll never, ever tell you why something happened. touch points matter. And now implicit in that, we're suggesting that not all of them do. So if you're doing 60 or 70 things, creating 60 or 70 different experiences across the functional areas in your organization over some period of time and across channels, it shouldn't be a huge stretch to accept that not all of those matter to the donors. And of those that do matter, they don't all matter equally. So if we can identify which touch points matter, that's going to give us the appropriate focus, meaning we're going to focus on the touch points that they assign value to, not the ones that we assign value to. Scale, fix, drop is the simple prescriptive part that can be then deployed if we identify which touch points matter. Scale up the ones that are having a positive impact on loyalty and value. Fix the ones that are root cause kind of pain points. If we want to borrow from the commercial sector, they love talking about pain points. Well, so root cause pain points. It's an experience that is broken from the donor's perspective that is pushing them towards the exit rather than keeping them in the fold. You need to fix those. And then drop is reducing the amount of time, effort, and spend we put against touch points that don't matter. Okay? This is about focus and starting to build out a set of supporter experiences or a supporter journey, if you prefer that label, that's built by the donor, not for the donor. Okay? And then the second part, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of the time in this webinar, service those touch points by servicing the donors having the experiences. That is frankly, a wordy way of saying get into the customer service business. And the reason we didn't say get into the customer service business on the slide is a fear that we have, that will instantly cause the majority of the folks on this session and in the sector to have the wrong context and start to think only about the handful of folks that staff the donor services department, those poor souls who are stuck in some windowless room in the basement of the organization, and their job is to wait for the phone to ring, and the organization actually hopes it doesn't. Okay? This is broader than that. We'll put some meat on that particular definition, but ultimately that's about customer service, and it is not relegated to those poor souls in that windowless office. Not entirely. All right, so first part first, and that is identifying those interactions that matter. And we are not going to have time in this session to cover this in depth. And we have done previous webinars on this topic. We can, as a part of the follow-up, send out a link to that. Anybody can email as a follow-up to get more detail on this. But this is important as a foundational part to give us that focus around which of these touch points we really need to put our time, effort, and spend against. So this is, again, another point of view on how the world works. How do we actually drive behavior, whether it's giving or doing? What is it that we do, which is what's intended to be reflected in shorthand on the left-hand side over here? How is it the time, effort, and spend that we put against the interactions that functionally and silo-wise tend to fall across these departments? Which of those things are actually causing the behavior? And as is suggested by this slide in the big white space, there's a piece in the middle that is too often missing within the nonprofit sector. Because the fact is, the experiences that we serve up, time, effort, and spend that we put against these interactions, don't directly cause the behavior that we're chasing. They indirectly cause that behavior. And until you get the piece in the middle right, you're never going to do a good job of identifying which of the experiences matter. So the piece in the middle is a measure of loyalty. We call it relationship strength or commitment. And for the first part of this webinar, if you take nothing else from the session, please know that relationship does not need to be a soft, fuzzy, just believe concept. It can be measured and managed. And there are certain interactions that your charity is serving up today that actually have a positive impact on relationship strength. There are certain interactions that you're serving up today that have a negative impact on relationship strength. And by extension, whether they stay or go, and by extension, the value of those donors to you. Okay? There are also interactions that you're serving up today that have no impact, and yet they're costing you time, effort, and money. And that's what this analytical exercise, which again we won't be able in today's session to go to in full breadth, is about. It's about identifying which of these matter. And it has to be done through the lens of this relationship strength model and framework. And to demystify this a bit, the way that this gets done, and I should clarify and make a very fine point on this, any charity on the phone today, you could be a startup with a single person, executive director, chief cook and bottle washer, or $1 billion charity, you can do this. Okay? The price is not a barrier. It can be done. It's a mindset bit and an education bit. So process-wise, this is about collecting attitudinal data and combining it with transactional. And that's the other point of view, is that you cannot crack the code on churn and the converse of that, retention, unless you are collecting attitudinal data and combining it with transactional. This does not require a PhD in data sciences to do this work. Okay? It can be done by the one-person charity with Excel. So the conceptual framework is important to understand and a useful context, even if you elect never to do this exercise. So the experiences that we serve up, they may or may not have an impact on the first step in relationship building, which is called functional connection. These are the magic 3 questions that measure functional connection. This is not a black box. We are sharing with you what was years of product development work to get this right. So in a survey, you can measure functional connection. How strong is the functional connection to my charity? Okay? You can also, with analysis on the back end that can be done in Excel, let me underscore that, determine which of the experiences you serve up actually cause this. Okay? So that's step 1 in relationship building. We need to identify which of our experiences are causing functional connection, because functional connection causes personal connection. Personal connection causes commitment. Commitment drives the behavior that we're after. We have to filter our experiences that we're serving up through the lens of commitment to understand which of these matter to the behavior that we're trying to affect. Okay? This is getting into the cause and effect business. This is getting into the why business. Personal connection, really quick, is step 2 in the relationship building. Those are the magic 3 questions to get a measure of personal connection, but more importantly, to allow you to then analytically determine which of those experiences cause personal connection. Commitment, these are the magic 3 questions to measure commitment, which is synonymous with trust, and commitment definitionally just means you've got motive or intent to maintain the relationship. So this is a very forward-looking model. We're not analyzing in the rearview mirror past data to predict future. We are looking at a forward-looking indicator of behaviors. Okay? So this is a way that you can go about determining which touch points matter. That's step 1, or it can be step 1. Okay? So what happens if you get this information? If we identify which touch points matter, which ones don't, which ones are broken, what do you do with that? This is a visual that is hopefully pretty straightforward. This is an illustration of a typical charity, reflecting the touch points that get served up, kind of the supporter journey, at least from the organization's perspective. You've got an acquisition piece. These are color-coded based on channel. This is acquisition. So we're doing a direct mail bit for acquisition. We bring donors on board. Next, we're going to send them a welcome kit. There's an acknowledgement. There's another donor appeal that goes out in month 2. There's an e-news that we publish, and they're going to get that in month 2. We have a magazine, another donor appeal. Okay? That's the world that gets built inside many, many charities on the call today. Maybe more complicated than this, but you understand the general gist here. This is what the world looks like as we're building it internally. Now, what happens if we went through the process I just described and we were evaluating these touch points to find out which ones matter, which ones don't, which ones are broken? What do you do with that? Well, you start to change the touch points. And if you're changing touch points over time and across channels, you're changing the supporter experience. And if you're making those changes based on reliable donor input, you're building the journey that was designed by the donors, not for the donors. Okay? So this is an amalgam of actual client work. This doesn't represent a single client, but this is, so it's partly for illustration, but recognize this is very real in that it reflects an amalgam of clients we've done this sort of work for. So what are we dictating, or noting rather, here is we're planning out what changes to make. We've gone external. We've actually listened to the donors. We had a point of view on how to collect that data and how to analyze it. It wasn't just random. Now we're going to apply those insights because we want to get in the business of only focusing on the touch points that matter and making sure that they're built by the donor, not for the donor. So in this instance, we're flagging out that the welcome kit needs to get redone. We found out through that exercise to identify which touch points matter that some of our key messages were off the mark. Okay? They actually aren't, from the donor's perspective, the reason that they're signing up and sticking around. So we can rework the welcome kit to have the content match donor preferences and needs. And that's all that we're flagging here. So you start to modify these touch points based on feedback from the constituents. In this case, we're going to move the acknowledgement up. You know, this didn't perhaps require analysis to come up with this judgment, but the sequence is off. We want the acknowledgement to come after acquisition and before the welcome. But again, the acknowledgement content is off. The acquisition content is off. And so in a vacuum, each of those pieces is missing the mark from the donor's perspective. And if you start to correct...
I might add that in case folks are wondering how they can possibly get this kind of information, that either later in this session and certainly in the follow-up materials we're going to send you are the survey mechanisms and tools and processes for doing this. This is something, as Kevin noted, that basically every organization can do. This is not anything mysterious, and we're going to share that with you.
Absolutely. So just playing this out a bit more here. Again, the appeals are off the mark content-wise. And if you start to change content for an appeal and have the revised version match up with donor need and preference, guess what? That brief doesn't change. We treat these campaigns in isolation, in a vacuum. What we're doing, if we harken back to that prior slide, we are undermining functional connection, which is this reliable, consistent experience, because we're treating everything in isolation. And what we're arguing is that if you identify donor needs and preferences, those ought to get applied to all of your touch points, all your individual campaigns, all the other interactions that you're having. You will, by definition, start to build in consistency. So in this case, we want consistency from acquisition to acknowledgement, from acknowledgement to welcome kits, all through the line here as we kind of temporally move across this supporter journey. You'll notice that we're flagging out and this was something that often gets discovered in that analysis to determine which of the touch points matter, because we're not just looking at fundraising touch points. We're looking at all of those interactions we have, that the donor care, supporter services department and those interactions matter, and oftentimes there is need to improve the process there. So this is a process-based flag that's telling us we need to fix the business rules around that inbound customer service. In this instance, we found that the magazine doesn't work. What does that mean? Well, it's not contributing to relationship strength, i.e. loyalty or commitment, and lifetime value. Drop it. Okay? And let me be clear, that is not some best practice that you ought to go out and deploy in your organization, or say we heard on the Donor Voice Agitator webinar we should get rid of the magazine. That's one of the great myths that, among many that sort of permeate the sector. The idea that there are best practices when it comes to some of these touch points. Magazines in or magazines out, or the welcome call after they come in the door is in or it's out, or you need to have e-news or you don't. we have found that that is very specific to the organization, their donors, and most importantly, the content that they're putting in those publications. So in many instances, we've been the magazine killer and the magazine savior. You cannot just follow blindly, like a lemming off a cliff, some of these best practices. You get into the sea of sameness. You're perpetuating a set of experiences that are commoditized, that look exactly the same, regardless of which charity I'm supporting. You got to get out of that game. There is no best practice on magazines. I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that. In this case, and again, we've been saviors and killers for the e-news publications. E-news is a winner. What does that mean? It means that when that publication is received, so this is not factoring in clicks and open rates and conversion rates. All that stuff is useful to improve the efficiency of that content. But what about for the vast majority of people who aren't taking actions that we're tracking? Is it having a positive impact on their relationship strength to the organization and their future behavior? That's the question we want to answer with this sort of work. Okay, so in this case, e-news is a winner, and we're going to increase the frequency of it. That's a scaling up opportunity. So what does it look like if you start to deploy this? What can we expect by way of performance and outcome? This is a real example where the donor appeal got redone, changing the content. And it wasn't brilliant creative copywriter. It wasn't some whiteboard exercise to come up with great new content. It wasn't a strategic brief from nowhere. It was, quite simply, here are the key messages, the key content that the donors assign value to. We are going to rework this particular appeal and only put in that content to the exclusion of everything else. And this is this is one example for a single appeal and the improvement that is possible if we start to build out supporter journeys that are by the donors, not for the donors. Okay? This is not random. This is repeatable. We know exactly why this outcome occurred. And you can repeat this process across the appeals and across the touch points, those that have asks and those that don't.
In fact, Kevin, not only can you repeat it, you should repeat it. I mean, one of the mistakes a lot of us make is thinking we always have to come up with something new, always something different, and what that does is interrupt the consistency that is an essential part of building trust. So that once the donor's idea of the ideal is identified, that is the horse to ride over and over again, whether you feel you're getting bored with it or not. The donors aren't getting bored with it. It's the very same reason why politicians, successful ones, stick to the same stump speech time after time after time. It bores them, it bores their staff, it bores the press, but it sure doesn't bore the voters because it is consistent and they can build on that. Well, the same goes for the messages of and the positioning of nonprofit communications.
Absolutely. So here's an instance of the outcome of dropping that magazine and keeping the e-newsletter. So this was instant savings to the bottom line. Okay? There's way too many charities that have the hope strategy with their magazine. And again, we're not making some blanket statement, keep or kill the magazine. You've got to do the work and find out if your magazine's worth keeping or not. But there's way too many charities who have the hope strategy around their magazine. Hope strategy meaning on a financial accounting basis, the ledger, it's showing red ink. It costs more than it directly raises. And the hope is that people are getting it, processing it, assigning value to it, and that's affecting their future behavior, meaning it's a good, positive experience, they're more likely to give. Well, that answer doesn't need to be a guess, doesn't need to be hoped on. And if you find out the magazine's not working, that's typically a big cost savings that can go to the bottom line without having a negative impact. So what's the alternative? And this is an actual example from an actual charity where they put together a loyalty test track, and many charities do this nowadays. You're seeing increasingly testing protocols that are multi-month testing plans or programs, some sort of a pilot, where the thing they want to evaluate is not response rate on a given campaign, but what effect does this change over time have on retention and value. So the eye is on the correct prize in this case, some of those longer-term metrics. However, oftentimes the way that loyalty pilot or program gets built is 100% internal, and it's random. Yeah, there's some adherence to quote-unquote best practices. So in this case, we've got the welcome card, the postcard, a mobile touch, an engagement newsletter, 100% concocted internally. There was no theoretical or academic or practical or data-based basis for these particular touch points in this particular order, and you have an infinite number of choices. And in this case, like many of these that we've seen, attrition actually went up. Not a lot, but a little. It took a lot of time and money to get this set up and then to wait for the proverbial ink to dry and the results to come in to determine that it didn't work. Why? Because it was random. All right, so we're going to shift gears here and focus on the meat of the session here, which is really the piece that is, probably easier to implement and think about because it's much more intuitive, and it's the piece that is really missing, and it is a first mover advantage to the charities that start to get into this business. And there's a lot of talk these days about being donor-centric, and I would offer up the provocative statement that it's actually impossible to be donor-centric and have that mean anything unless you get into the game collecting and acting on donor feedback. Okay? What does that mean? Well, all you have to do is harken back to your lives as consumers to understand what we're talking about when we say getting in the game on collecting and acting on donor feedback. The commercial world is desperate for your feedback. You are, no doubt, as a consumer, getting inundated with requests for feedback immediately after you've had an experience with that entity. Buy something online, take an airplane flight, stay in a hotel, shop at a retail establishment, have breakfast at IHOP. They're asking for feedback. What do they want to know? It's not random. It's not guesswork. They want to know, how did we do on this experience, this interaction you just had with us? Because they know that 50% of the repurchase decision is not tied to the tangible product that we're putting in market, but to the associated experiences and the service levels around that product. Okay? And they know that the only and best time to determine whether we did a good job on that given experience is right after it happens. And at the individual supporter level. This is not surveys. Banish that word from your vocabulary for the purposes of this session and this part of the session. We are not talking about surveys. Okay? We're talking about customer service and the broadest definition, and the one that, again, I will argue, is a better way to raise money than fundraising. Okay? So why should we bother? Here's a quick snapshot. This is a test control. Everyone's very familiar with this sort of a setup. We have our test universe who had some sort of a treatment protocol compared to our control group. This is looking at performance for the test group compared to the control 6 months after the tests. Look at these massive changes in the behavior, all in the direction that we want. So what was the test here? It was a single instance of collecting feedback. One point in time at time 0, and then what we're looking at here is 6 months after time 0. Okay?
Kevin, this is significant. This is significant money. Do you have potential for significant money? Do you have any sort of rules of thumb or general impressions of what this amounts to in terms of? I mean, a 35% increase in profit is a significant change for simply asking questions. Has that been consistent within range across the board for different types of organizations?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is the expectation. And again, look at this example. This is feedback at a single point in time. What we're advocating here, and there are charities, we're going to share some examples, who are getting into this game. They are going to have not only just the intrinsic benefit that feedback provides, which is what you're seeing here and getting into this, they're going to have first mover advantage, okay? They're going to be novel in a sector that does none of this. So the upside is significant. And again, I would argue this is a better way to raise money than fundraising. I'll say it again. Fundraising defined as we're in the volume business. That's what it is. It's a volume play. You can have quality and quantity.
Well,
So,
it seems to me, Kevin, this is important. For example, in the Agitator, I guess 2 weeks ago, I did a piece on a public radio station, WBUR in Boston, who is worried, rightly so, that the existence of smartphones and tablets will eventually disconnect their supporters, their listeners, from the station itself, because they can get the programming through podcasts from NPR or PBS and other outlets. And so it seems to me a distinguishing process for a lot of organizations that face this new technological competition or mission dissolution lies in this feedback process, because asking people for their opinion bonds them closer to the organization and therefore makes them a bit more weatherproof when it comes to changing technology.
yeah, no question. And then there's, as we'll get into this part of the webinar and the session here, we'll show the other kind of upside of the feedback bit. So it is first and foremost, it is about getting into the true one-to-one relationship building business. That's not just some throwaway kind of bullshit line of one-to-one marketing. You can actually do it, and it is scalable. You can have quality and quantity, and that is the principal benefit here. This is a better way to raise money. The other significant benefit is being able to aggregate some of this feedback over time and identify systematic opportunities and issues. And on the opportunity and issue side, that's one of the things that can help public radio and others find a path forward. What are the donors telling us? Where do the opportunities and the threats exist? Let's not concoct that 100% internally. So the feedback process, we're going to get into a bit of detail here because it's useful and it matters. So what is the donor feedback process exactly? There's three pieces. Collecting the feedback, pretty obvious. Apply business rules based on the feedback, and then what we're calling case management. And this is a visual, and again, you'll have these slides. You don't need to spend a ton of time trying to absorb this, and I'm not going to go into every detail here, but this will relate to the content on the left here, or the outline on the left. So collecting feedback, what are we talking about? So you can collect feedback in multiple modes, through multiple channels. Obviously, there's web-based feedback. There's email. There's live persons. You can have an agent on the phone, a donor service agent, who's going to ask questions after that interaction. Remember, this is after the interaction. That's what we're talking about. It's tied to the point and place of the experience, and we want it to be tied to the channel in which that experience is occurring. And we want to know how we're doing. Very simple. How are we doing? How do we do on that experience you just had with us? Was it great, or did we screw it up? You can also do it with IVR. So IVR, interactive voice response, right? That's what you no doubt have experienced when you call into a customer service line. It can be used for the routing mechanism. Press button 1 if you want this, button 2 if you want that. But there are other ways you can use IVR. You could administer feedback scripts, surveys, with IVR. So they just read the questions, and you either speak or punch in the responses. So those are different ways that you can collect the feedback. Now, the special sauce that we're putting on this, and we're arguing for as the best way to do this, is ask those commitment questions. Okay, we saw those in the previous slide, and again, you'll get the slides, you'll get the questions. It's not black box. That is important to put the transactional kind of diagnostic feedback into perspective, meaning, yeah, if I found out I just screwed up a given experience, the context that I want to have with that donor is, do they love us or not? Is the relationship strong or not? So someone who is high commitment to us, and we just screwed up the website experience, triage-wise, if I'm trying to put some hierarchy on where to follow up first, I want to talk to that person first. Okay, so it puts the transactional experiential feedback into context. So we always advocate asking those so that we can group people into high versus low when we're looking at the feedback they give us around the experience they just had. And that's what we're referring to by this diagnostic measure. These are the questions that are tied to the experience. These are purposeful. They're not random. This is not a go explore, ask all sorts of crazy questions. This needs to be very short and purposeful. And what we need to ask is whether or not, is think about the job of that transaction or that experience. What is the donor trying to accomplish? So in the case of an inbound donor service call, the diagnostic question that I want to ask, at least one of them, is did we get your question or issue resolved today? At the end of the process, the donor service agent wants to key this up as a closed case. I want to ask the supporter. And again, you can do that with the agent asking the question. You can send them an email afterwards that has that question in it. You can transfer them to an IVR, or they'll then punch in their answer or speak their answer. That's what I want to know. Okay, so that is overall satisfaction with a given experience is also useful. If they're going through an online donation process, how easy was the process? We spend forever and a day and $1 bazillion trying to optimize the website. Most of that is done with a lot of internal guesswork. You will never, ever completely optimize anything, and the only way to really optimize is to combine that transactional web behavior data with donor feedback data. Okay? So we're going to ask those questions, and they're going to be tied to the interaction in part based on the diagnostic questions that we elect to ask. The business rules are pretty straightforward. They can be 100% applied with automation. The free feedback widget that everyone on the call has an opportunity to set up and use free forever does all of this. It's for the website, but it does all of this. And what it's doing is it's segmenting those folks who give feedback based on these measures. And so they're going to go into one of 4 boxes. Okay? And then what we're doing is advocating for 2 levels of follow-up. First level of follow-up is going to be automated. Okay? And it's going to be an email response, more often than not, that is tied to their feedback. This is that kind of closed-loop process. So we're not just asking for feedback. We're going to respond to it. Yes, it's automated, but it is in the better-than-nothing category. And you can actually get increased lift by not just asking for feedback, but responding to it. And you get increased lift based on this automated follow-up. And as you might imagine, step 3, which is kind of the human element here, you're going to get even more lift on future performance, future behavior, if we then, in addition to the automated follow-up, which is at least responsive at the segment level, right? So relationship building message here. They're low commitment, but we did a good job on the interaction. High commitment screwed up the interaction they just had. This is a problem resolution kind of a message. We're going to apologize in that email, of course. Then there comes to case management, okay, where you want real people, humans, to follow up with your folks. Okay, and I can see the eye rolls or the questions about how is that possibly scalable? How can we do that? It is 100% mindset and a function of whether or not you assign this as a core part of your business or not. The vast majority of the nonprofit sector does not. Large chunks of the commercial sector do. And that's not because they're billion-dollar enterprises. It has nothing to do with revenue. You can be a $100,000 charity or a billion-dollar charity, and we're talking about percentages here. What percentage of your spend against the house file do you allocate to getting in the service business? That's all.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Kevin, it's quite, we offered the widget, I don't know, it's 90 days ago in the agitator, and a number of organizations have been using it, and I've been struck by some very small ones are putting it to work, and also some very big ones. I think you have an example of a big one later, but it's remarkable what they're reporting. It's not just increase in the value of the donor financially. It's they've also found out things about their their volunteers, about their issues. I mean, they're getting lots of feedback that serves as sort of a GPS for steering the organization.
Yeah, unquestionably. And well, let's in the interest of time, let's push through some of these examples here. So again, let's go back to our illustrative hypothetical example. We've now changed the supporter journey based on the feedback. We're going to reorient some of these touch points. We're going to rework the content. We're going to add in touch points. We're going to drop touch points. But we really want to get into the business of servicing those touch points by servicing the donors that are having the experiences, getting exposed to them. So here's a real example, Child Fund to Client. This has been shared publicly before. They have a fairly significant kind of sponsor care department, means it's people who are there to deal with inbound issues or concerns, whether it's phone or email. And they have, as a part of that standard process today, you call in, you're going to get that IVR, which is nothing more than the computer-generated kind of menu-driven, press 1 for this, 2 for that. People come in, they handle the call as usual, and then at the end of the call, they ask the person if they're willing to provide feedback about that experience. Can you give us another minute of your time and tell us how the call went? Transfer those people in, and then they get administered this, transfer the people to this IVR, so it's a computer that then reads off the questions, and here's what they measure. Overall satisfaction with the experience they just had, the helpfulness or the friendliness of the agent. That's not random, okay? They in this instance, did some of that commitment work up front, determined that not only was donor service or support or care in their vernacular important, but that there was a pain point, an issue with the friendliness and the helpfulness of the agents from the donor's perspective. So a really good way to start to get a handle on that and to remediate it, fix it, is ask people to rate that after they've just had an experience. And if they get a bad rating, you can follow up. They ask first call resolution, which was that question I referenced earlier. Did they get their issue or concern addressed? And then they're measuring commitment, so adhering to that framework that we outlined. Here's the upside, okay? These are significant improvements in save rate, which is, in this instance, as we mentioned in the very beginning, kind of that trigger point where they have people calling in to cancel, or it's an outbound call because we noticed that the credit card's not processing. So they are improving the save rate by adhering to this feedback process. Significant increase in cross-sell and upsell, all sorts of operational and process-based benefits here as we get to policies and agent training improvements. Okay? This is not adding much cost, if any, to the whole process, and it's got significant upside. This is a profit center, not a cost center. This is to underscore the notion that getting into the service business is a better way to raise money than fundraising. Okay? This is an amalgam of data from across the sector, and all we've done here is break out retention rate for donors based on the complaints and whether or not it was registered at all, and then the resolution or lack of for that complaint. Here's the retention rate for the people who didn't complain. Look at the bump you get just by what we would call turning up the volume. Don't pretend like complaints don't exist. They do. You're having interactions. Nobody has built a perfect experience and never will. There are always going to be hiccups, idiosyncratic or otherwise. And merely turning up the volume, letting these people be heard, and tying it to the time and place of interaction can give you a significant increase in retention. Okay? And then, yes, of course, the ideal is that we actually follow up and mitigate the problem. Okay? It's a better way to raise money than fundraising, period. You can get into the quality and the quantity business. You just have to decide that this is a core part of your business. And then you will allocate a proportionate amount of money and spend against it. So what is servicing that welcome kit? Remember the welcome kit in our new experience, we're keeping it, but we needed to change the content. We can actually get feedback off the welcome kit. Welcome kit in this case doesn't have an ask, so we have absolutely no idea if it's doing its job on an ongoing basis. Well, why not ask for feedback on the back of one of the many inserts in the welcome kit? So this is an actual example where in this case, again, we're not going to measure things willy-nilly. We are going to measure commitment, but we just want to know whether this welcome kit did its job. Okay, did it deliver content that was useful and help them better understand the organization and the membership they just signed up for? Okay. Servicing that e-news touch point. There's an opportunity to collect feedback around that touch point. And again, the questions that we ask here are going to be very specific to the content and the job of this e-news piece. I want to take a brief but important kind of look at the online world, because that's where all the growth is. No, total dollars are still not coming through the online channel for the vast majority of charities, but it is where all the growth is occurring. We're arguing that you're leaving a ton of money on the table around the online donation experience. And there's a simple way to actually get in the game here and start to figure out where we're leaving money on the table and how to fix the problem. And that is collecting feedback after they've made the donation. Okay, so transactionally, it's success. They've gone through the maze, they've hit the submit button with their credit card information entered, and the transaction has been processed, right? Success. How did the experience go? What happened there? And this is an actual example from a client where you see we're measuring the commitment questions, but in this case we're measuring whether or not the ease of the donation process. That's what we want to know. Yeah, they may have given, but what if it was a crappy experience? This is actual data, case management report. These are people who donated online. Success, right? They must love us. They donated online. What we're measuring here, and this is just a snippet, but you're looking at commitment scores. You see a big range. Some people who love us, who don't love us at all, and everything in between. You're also seeing the churn risk that gets assigned to these people. Okay, and then we got open-end comment here. This is that case management part. This is the human piece. There's opportunity beyond kind of that automatic response that's going to get pushed out to have follow-up here. This is significant ROI. Okay, and it can be scaled. Of course it can be scaled. Put more people on it. If you assign value to it, you can scale it. So just to highlight a few of these things, will the recipient of the gift subscription I just sent be informed of who sent the gift, or must I inform them myself? So what happens in this instance is that the donor service team is going to follow up at the individual constituent level with this person and clear up this confusion. Now, in this instance, we found that this was a recurring theme. Multiple people, a significant chunk, had this same confusion. So our brilliantly designed online giving experience is broken for those people who are doing this as a gift. We got to get in and fix that. Okay. Some of these other examples. Took 6 tries to give you money. On the 4th try, I was so aggravated I unchecked the additional donation button. You would never know this, and you would just assume that donor X here, who is somewhat dissatisfied and fledgling commitment, probably walking out the door, who it was not a completely sold loyal donor to begin with, had a crappy experience. Guess what? Absent this, they're gone. Okay? This is what we're talking about in terms of servicing the interactions and the donors having those interactions. In the interest of time, we're not going to jump. There's an actual demo here, but this is another place where you can start to get at the why question. I bet every charity on the planet would nod their head in agreement that it would be really nice to know for those people who come to our website and go to the donation page but don't actually donate, why? You will never, ever get at that looking at the web analytics data, the web behavior data. But you can get at it if you ask them, and you can set the feedback up so that it's triggered by that exact behavior that I just described. And this is a demo site that you can go to that we built to illustrate some of this. Okay? This is the point that I referenced based on Roger's comment. So it's not just that individual level follow-up, right? That's the principal value here. But these are all changes that got made once we aggregated some of that feedback and looked at the user experience. In this case, it was for online giving. These are all changes that got made, not because we just ginned them up or someone thought it was cool or someone else was doing it on another charity website. This was all driven by the donor feedback and seeing these systemic problems and then fixing them. All right, we are past time here. Appreciate everyone's patience in sticking with us. We got to sort of hit on some of the closing bits and the goodies here. So let us do that. Quick recap. Interactions with your donors actually matter, okay? And whether they stick around is going to be determined by the quality of those interactions. The two-part process to get in that game, figure out which ones matter, and then service the heck out of them. It's a better way to raise money than fundraising. So the closing bit here, there is this free forever feedback widget. This is a self-serve, and it is not hyperbole. You can be up in minutes. Okay? We have tiny charities with no staff up in minutes. And this is the website for, again, we'll send this. You don't need to write this down. You'll have all access to all of this. But this is a way to get into that feedback business in the exact process that I described. Collect feedback. The business rules get applied. A push email gets sent out that's responsive to that feedback. And then you as the charity can download the individual supporters who provided the feedback and do the case management follow-up, okay, on the website. Lots of charities who are up and running with this already. It is a mindset thing, not a process time, and certainly not a cost thing in this instance. Okay? Roger, anything else as closing bits here?
Yeah, well, Kevin, first of all, thank you very much. This has been just wonderful and informative, and I really urge folks to go back through this presentation again, to take advantage of the free widget and try it out, and to understand this, because it is just as Kevin points it, this is money that's a lot easier and better and cheaper than what we generally call fundraising. And of course, I'll shamelessly plug retention fundraising, where some of these commitment scores and concepts are also published. And thank you all for your time. We appreciate it a great deal. And we didn't get to answer questions, but as I said at the start, we will compile the questions, put the answers in. We'll treat the questions anonymously, and then we'll get back specifically to the questionnaire with answers apropos to your organization. So thank you all. In Europe, have a good evening. Here in North America, have a good afternoon. And for those of you in Australia and New Zealand, good morning. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, everybody.